Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on the implementation of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, where we're going to discuss the minimum energy performance standards. This is part of our webinar series on the EPBD, and this is our second session. You can go to the next slide. Yes, so very welcome. I'm Céline Carré. I'm Head of Public Affairs with Saint-Gobain, a member company of Efficient Buildings Europe. And I'm also the chair of the Energy Efficiency Policies Working Group in Efficient Buildings Europe. For those who have not heard yet about Efficient Buildings Europe, we are the voice of energy efficiency in buildings at EU level. So we represent those 15 member companies with all technologies dedicated to enhancing energy efficiency in buildings, both for new buildings and for renovation. So you would find technologies for the building envelope, for the systems, for the controls, for the digitalization of buildings. And what do? We are there to help and boost the uptake of energy efficiency solutions in buildings, to raise awareness, understanding, so that the full potential and benefits of energy efficiency in buildings lands on the ground in our buildings and is reflected in solid and stable policy framework. So we're trying to trigger that better understanding and also political commitment to realize this potential. You can go to the next slide. Yes, so today we have those MEPS on the menu. MEPS stand for Minimum Energy Performance Standards. They're not members of the European Parliament, even though they've been debated a lot during the negotiations around the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. MEPS were part of the novelties discussed when the discussions around the EU renovation wave started, although they already existed in some countries in the EU, but also in the US. And they've been debated a lot, sometimes with excitement, curiosity, also cautiousness. And here we are today to see how they can support the acceleration of renovation in the EU, what role they can play in transforming the stocks next to other drivers, such as financing support or support on the ground, such as one-stop shop. How does the market react? And also what impulse can minimum energy performance standards give to this fine equilibrium between regulatory drive and incentives. So to well understand what we are going to talk about, we're going to listen first in our first session to Serena Pontoglio, who is going to describe and explain what is in the text of the EPBD regarding MEPS, how to MEPS and those regulatory requirements expressed for the different segments in the building stock. And then we'll listen to the recommendation from Efficient Buildings Europe by Rémi Colombet, who is Head of Policy in Efficient Buildings Europe. So without further ado, I will give them the floor. After those two first presentations, we're going to have sometimes 4 questions. Don't hesitate to use the chat to put your question. So Serena, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Céline, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to be in this workshop this morning. So the topic is indeed the minimum energy performance standards. As Céline has already mentioned, this is a policy tool to trigger renovations. It's one of the new elements of the recast Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. So one of the policy tools that we have introduced to trigger the renovation of buildings. MEPS, as they are foreseen in Article 9 of the EPBD, have to be applied to the non-residential building stock. So to buildings which are used for something which is different than housing. So we have in this category offices, hospitals, schools, shops, etc. So all the buildings which are used for non-housing purposes. As regards specifically what is foreseen in the EPBD, basically the way how minimum energy performance standards work is that each member states have to identify a level of energy performance, which we call energy performance thresholds, which is corresponding to minimum energy performance standards. And as regards the level of ambition of these thresholds, what is foreseen in the directive is that by 2030, the thresholds should be set at such a level to basically identify and correspond to the worst 16% of the non-residential building stock, while for the following in the following 3 years, so by 2033, the threshold should become lower in such a way to correspond to the worst 26% of the non-residential building stock. So these are the basic requirements, and there are also criteria for exemptions or exclusions of buildings in the non-residential building stock. So these are the technicalities somehow of the regulatory framework and the level of ambition, but basically the idea behind is that this is a tool that should help to prioritize a renovation of worse performing buildings, with the idea that these are the buildings that are more in need, but also the buildings which is more cost effective to renovate, because there are more options and more cost effective options in comparison to buildings which are in a better situation as regards energy performance. So this is really a tool to prioritize actions at national level. What we are doing right now, and I will also come back to this in a moment, is that we are in the Commission preparing a guidance document on several articles and touching on the new provisions on the EPBD, with the aim to provide some practical information and advice to member states in the implementation of the new requirements. We are exactly now in implementation phase, and to help also in the interpretation of some elements of the directive, also from the technical point of view. In this work, while thinking about how the implementation at a national level will work, we have identified a stepwise approach for the design and the implementation of minimum energy performance standards, for which we have identified 5 key steps that need to be addressed to make minimum energy performance standards operational in each and every member state. I will go very quickly into them. The first step is a very, very important one, is the step about data and about really getting the knowledge about the non-residential building stock, because this is really a key issue to really implement well MEPS and identify specifically the correct level of the threshold that can really drive a renovation in the right way. And so there's a lot of work already ongoing in member states in gathering information and data on buildings, either from energy performance certificate, but also from other databases, also administrative databases, and in some cases also to have ad hoc data collection to fill the gaps that are there. And in the guidance, what we do, we explain a little bit what the sources could be and how to use sampling or to have ad hoc surveys to gather information on specific parts of the building stock, for instance. The second step is that of defining the indicators, the threshold, the baseline, which are key elements of the requirements, and that also have to be reported in the national building renovation plans, which are due in draft by the end of this year. The following step is that of designing the governance and the rules of compliance in each and every country, which is a step that includes, for instance, the identification of the authorities in charge of identifying buildings, of communicating with building owners, and of checking compliance. The first step is that of setting up an enabling framework to support the building owners in the renovation efforts, so providing technical advice, but also financial support where needed. And then the last step, which is also quite important, is that of set up a monitoring mechanism and also penalty scheme. And the monitoring to some extent is also done in parallel to the planning exercises over time. So also due through building renovation plans, but also through different other means. And as regards compliance, one element which is mentioned in the directive is also the important role of EPCs, because there's the same indicator of energy performance is in the EPC and is also the basis of the requirement for minimum energy performance standards. Next slide, please. So in the next slide, what I have is an illustration of how to define energy performance thresholds. And I have two figures, which brings to the principle that we recommend very much in the guidance and in our discussion with member states about the implementation of this requirement. What we recommend is not to have one threshold for the all non-residential building stock, because this could be not helpful in terms of prioritizing the buildings to renovate, could be somehow even distortive, because there are different use patterns in buildings like schools or offices. So we have to take that into account while establishing MEPS at a national level. So we recommend really to have a more granular approach and to define thresholds specific to different categories of buildings. And one way how to do it is basically to have somehow a frequency distribution of the buildings based on the level of energy performance. So it's what you see in this figure with the different bars, which could represent one building or a group of buildings. And once this distribution is available and data have been collected, the thresholds, the 16% and the higher one can be identified and then be communicated and put also into legislation. The idea is that to renovate and to improve the energy performance by 16%, small, to some extent, small improvements or just the changes in one element of the buildings could be sufficient. But then it's also important to have a long-term perspective, which is always important when thinking about buildings, and already perhaps thinking about the next steps in the following year. When this perspective is taken into account, also deep renovation can also be triggered and promoted more efficiently. Then in my last slide, I have a few information about the next steps. I've already mentioned the work that we are doing right now in the Commission in the preparation of the guidance document, which we plan to adopt by the end of June. And we had already extensive discussions on each of them with member states through the Energy Performance of Buildings Committee. As regards member states, it's really time for working and preparing the implementation and to also start preparing the consultation process in relation to draft national building renovation plans. The EPBD recast entered into force already in May this year, but the deadline for transposition is the end of May of next year. So these are the key dates in our timeline and the key aspect of the work that we are doing in relation to the implementation specifically of the MEPS, but also they apply more generally to the other requirements of the EPBD. And I will stop here now. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to reply to questions that you may have.
Yeah, thank you very much, Serena, for this first introduction and overview on MEPS. We are going to take now Rémi with the recommendation from Efficient Buildings Europe. And after that, we gather for questions and answer session for the session 1. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Celine. Good morning, everyone. Very happy to be here. My name is Rémi Colombet. I'm the head of EU policy at Efficient Buildings Europe. Next slide, please. And I'm the lead author of our implementation guide on the EPBD. So the idea for us is that the success in implementation of the directive is very important to the sector, and that's why we published this guide to support national ministries, but also empower national stakeholders to exchange, participate in the implementation process, and be constructive. So the guide contains 55 recommendations that are a mix of ideas on how to implement specific measures in the directive, but also recommendations to future-proof and go beyond what's required in the directive. Make sure that sometimes you want to act on your building once and not 3 times. So this is the idea to go a bit further than what's required. It also contains case studies. There are lots of countries that have already implemented one specific measure. And so inspiration can be drawn from their experience on what went well, but what did not work. For example, also it's interesting to know what could be done better and save time for other member states to progress. Next slide, please. So just coming back on the rationale for MEPS, minimum energy performance standards, and the main idea is to allow building owners and industry players to plan ahead, to make sure that they have a clear objective down the line, that they can save up the money necessary to enter the project, that they have sufficient lead time to prepare and get the right information for their renovation project. And it's a good incentive for member states to stop the stop and go policies that have been so problematic for the sector, and have a bit of a more industrial approach, let's say, to building renovations. It's a good opportunity to re-engage with the whole community of stakeholders that need to be mobilized to achieve the MEPS objectives. It's the main new tool in the directive to address stagnating renovation rates. We've seen that in the past, we're not where we need to be if we want to achieve our energy and climate objectives. And this measure is meant to boost those renovation rates, really focusing on the worst performing buildings. And this is where it's really complementary in our view to ETS2, where it's really pushing to protect and improve the performance of worst performing buildings where we know there's an overrepresentation of vulnerable households. And so it's really aimed at sheltering them from the potential negative impact of the ETS2. Next slide, please. So when it comes to our recommendation, the first one is really to design a clear framework. We've seen some member states that already have implemented MEPS provisions at national level. Some have prepared the ground and worked on the sequencing, for example, looking at rent freeze first before going into MEPS, so as to prepare and incentivize already building owners to act early on. So really having a right sequencing over time is important to bring along the community. Adopting a simple requirement based either on EPC classes or a set of actions to implement is really something that's key. Having really a clear framework and good communications on it will help to bring people along on this journey. So making sure that everybody's aware of where they need to go, that the deadlines are clear for everyone regarding compliance, but also penalties, that all the rules are set well in advance, and so everyone has time to prepare. But also making sure that the governor communicates properly on the rationale behind the measure. So making sure that it's clear that there's obviously an energy and climate issue, but it's also a social issue to address those worst performing buildings. The enabling framework that Serena was mentioning before is also key. So making sure that EPCs, renovation passports, are reliable, especially if MEPS are based on these tools, is very important to drive a buy-in for those measures. We've seen member states such as France, for example, that is making certifiers liable for the EPC class that they attribute to buildings. So this all contributes to reinforcing the reliability of the system and make sure that there's confidence in the tools that are available. There's also a need to make the link between different related provisions, let's say, in other pieces of legislation, like the Energy Efficiency Directive, where you have in Article 5 and 6 provisions on the exemplary role for the public sector and renovation obligations for public buildings. There's a strong link with provisions on non-residential buildings in the minimum energy performance standards. But beyond that, we see that there's also heating and cooling plans in the ED that the cities have to establish and act upon. It's very important to link renovation requirements and those heating and cooling decarbonization plans to make sure that there's no technology lock-ins, that there's coherence between the different requirements in terms of EU policy. Next slide, please. Serena was mentioning the needs to identify worst performing buildings as one of the first steps, and indeed we see that as a very core activity. There we really recommend to member states that they build on existing tools. There's lots of initiatives in different countries to move a bit faster than waiting for the full coverage in terms of EPCs. We see URBS in France, OpenGela, that we'll hear about a bit later today in Spain, and lots of these tools are open source. So this is something that other member states can use, really using cadastral data and other types of databases that they already have. We see also that smart meters can accelerate mapping, especially in the public sector. Private sector, there might be some issues with GDPR rules, but we see that there's some projects like Priorino, where the DSO was able to identify worst performing buildings in the schools building stock and advise the government on where to go first. Next slide, please. Our third point is really to make sure that MEPS also drive renovations in the residential sector. In the directive, it's clearly stated that 55% of the effort needs to come from renovation in worst performing buildings, defined as the 43% worst performing buildings of the stock. So there we clearly see that it's where there's the highest savings potential. It's also a matter of social equity, where it will mostly benefits vulnerable households that are overrepresented in those buildings. There's, as I mentioned, a strong link and a strong rationale to address potential negative consequences of ETS2. There, the funds from the Social Climate Fund could be dedicated to achieve good results in this segment of the building stock. More generally, we see a strong rationale to apply MEPS more generally in the residential sector. We know that the directive, and especially Article 9, Paragraph 2 on residential, gives a lot of flexibility to member states, but we see that there are opportunities to apply MEPS more widely based on trigger points and having different requirements for different types of building segments, where in some of them you can progress a bit faster. Next slide, please. So future-proofing the building stock is really key there. We see that obviously the MEPS have a timeline to 2030 to 2035, but given the average length of the renovation cycles, it's good to have a roadmap until 2050 and making sure that there's tools that are incentivized, like renovation passports. So building owners have a long-term view in their renovation projects, that there's no technology lock-ins, but also that the financial tools that are put on the table to encourage MEPS and support building owners encourage deeper renovations. And next to that, we also see that so there are exemptions for historical buildings in the directive, but we strongly advise not to have them by default. We know that there are modern techniques that can be used that do not affect the architectural merit, and so it'd be a pity to just discard quite a large part of the building stock, as we know already today that we have the techniques. We have a briefing on that that's accessible directly in our implementation guide. Next slide, please. So in the guide, you'll find good practices from 3 member states, France, the Netherlands, and Flanders. I won't go too much into that because we'll have some presentations today from some of them. And we're also part of the EPBD.wise project. It's a live project that's aimed at supporting the implementation of, among others, minimum energy performance standards in Central and Eastern European countries. So you'll have the first part of the project that's already available in terms of policy needs identified for those countries on the EPBD-wise website, and the policy recommendations are coming very soon to provide support to those countries. So that's the extent of my presentation. Happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Serena, and thank you, Remy, for your first input presentations. So it's quite a change, and the potential is quite big with those minimum energy performance standards. And we've also heard from Remy that there is a potential to roll them out in the residential segment, although the definition and the way to express this renovation requirement in the residential sector is a bit different, because it is a trajectory which member states will have to develop as part of this Article 9. So we have a bit of time for a Q&A. So I will first take some of those questions already in the chat. So we have a questions around exemption coming from Aphrodite. So which building can member state exempt from this minimum energy performance standard framework, and what are the flexibility that member states have? So I think maybe Serena, you could explain a little bit how this is working on the ground. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Celine, and thank you for the question. So there are 2 elements there to mention. One is exclusions of buildings straight away, and the other one is exemptions. So exemptions are foreseen in Article 9, and there are specific criteria related to cost effectiveness or future use of the buildings that can justify an exemption of individual buildings. And on this, so member states will have to set these criteria in a very transparent way, so they are applied in the same way across the country. And but the assessment, if there is a building that fall under these exemption criteria, will have to be done on a case by case, or through, I mean, if the general criteria will be directly applicable, this could also be the case. But at the same time, there is also the need to take into account that if those buildings are excluded from the MEPS, the missed improvements in terms of energy performance and energy efficiency will have to be realized in other parts of the residential building stock. So this assessment has to be done quite carefully. And so this is about criteria for exemptions, but there is also another flexibility which relates to categories of buildings which could be excluded straight away. And in that case, those buildings will not even be part of the baseline, which has to be used for the setting of the thresholds. And one, probably the bigger categories in terms of numbers of buildings is what has been mentioned already by Remy. So it's buildings which are protected for historical or cultural reasons. And there, the member states can decide to not apply the MEPS to non-residential buildings with which also based on national legislation following these categories. But again, also this has to be carefully assessed, because we also hear a lot from stakeholders, from representing the cultural buildings and protected buildings, that they don't want to be excluded from those mechanisms that also have, you know, specific support and financial support, and also because these kind of buildings also really need to be renovated to ensure that they can be used over time and they're not become completely derelict and cannot be used anymore. So this is a decision to be taken to some extent, also perhaps on a case by case, but also through general criteria. And then there are other categories of buildings which could be excluded straight away, like buildings which are used just for a few months a year, or religious buildings, or buildings of the armed forces, or temporary buildings. And this is all established in EPBD.
Thank you, Serena, for this explanations. I would like to complement using the privilege of the moderator to expand a little bit the question, because we can look at those buildings which can or should be exempted, but also we can look at which building can be prioritized in this dynamic. And I'd like to link that to one of the questions put in the chat, which is about how to ensure a long-term approach to the deployment of MEPS. So how do you envisage member states will take on those requirements and develop the prioritization in the first year, but also having the view that the entire building stock needs to be renovated. So how do you envisage this evolution over time?
Yeah, on this, I think it's a very good point to really think and plan, having a long-term perspective in mind. I think what is important also to remind that the baseline is year 2020. So even actions that are taken now would be accounted somehow for the achievement of this threshold. So the long-term perspective starts already really right now in the present, and the fact that there's a target by 2030 or 2033 should really not stop or delay action later on, because this will be somehow rewarded and taken into account already. And then in terms of next steps after 2030, I've already mentioned really the importance of planning and of the building renovation plan as a planning tool to have really a trajectory in mind also for the non-residential building stock. And on this, the EPBD foresees that besides the thresholds that in number or in terms of level of ambition are already fixed for 2030 and 2033, so the 16% and the 26%, member states will also have already in their first plan identified thresholds for 2040 and 2050. So to really have a longer term perspective in mind, which should be compatible with the long term goal for the all building stock. So this thinking of long term should be really in the mind of the in the process and exercise of implementation of the EPBD, and also has to be supported for building owners with specific tools. And in that sense, one important tool is also the renovation passport, which when it was conceived, I think the idea was more to target owners of residential buildings, but could be really very effective also for more complex, bigger, non-residential buildings, really identifying different actions that can be taken over time in a logic way, not to lock in deeper renovation. And so this tool can also really help in practical terms to plan for deep renovations over time.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm just reading the question, Celine, but you tell me if you want me to address some of them.
Please go on if you want to address. There is one regarding the guidance document that will be published in June. Maybe you want to take this one.
Yes. So in the current planning, but it's still work in progress. We have planned for 13 documents addressing specific topics of the EPBD. One is, I mean, for some of them we have an obligation to develop guidance, because there's a specific requirement to the Commission to develop guidance written in the EPBD, and one of these is, for instance, the definition of fossil fuel boilers, which is also linked to the requirement that already kicked in at the beginning of this year to phase out financial incentive to fossil fuel powered boilers. So we have 11 documents covering the policies and tools for renovation, so MEPS and the trajectory for the residential buildings, EPCs, energy performance calculation, solar, sustainable mobility, zero emission buildings databases, data exchange, financial provisions under Article 17. I'm not sure if I numbered all of them, but I think it gives the definition of fossil fuel boilers, which I mentioned, but I have not listed. So that's these are the topics that we are covering. Our idea was to basically address all the new or substantially updated provisions in the EPBD, and we had this initial idea, and then we tested it with national authorities, and there was a great interest also to go a bit into the details. So we have covered all the topics, because we also received feedback that was useful work from our side.
Okay, thank you, Selena. Indeed, you've been quite busy, and the next months are going quite busy to finalize those guidance documents. So thanks for that. I think member states are also participating in that process, but this is really of relevance to the entire community. Thanks for that. I would take a couple of more questions before we move to the next session. I will take the one on how can country juggle their national evolution in those standards and what's happening in the EPBD. We have a question regarding a risk of superposition of standard. Maybe you, Remy, do you want to say a little word about that? And while Remy is responding, I spotted a question regarding shelters. So in the meantime, Serena, maybe you can think about this one. I'll give you the word afterwards. Okay.
Yeah, happy to answer. I think that's if countries already have schemes in place, that's already something that they won't have to do. It's a good thing. I think the assessment that they'll have to make is whether the scheme that they already have in place covers the provision of the EPBD, or if they need to be extended further. As the case, for example, in France, we know that the tertiary decree addresses buildings with a surface of over 1,000 square meters. They would potentially need to extend that a bit below that surface to cover all the buildings that would need to fit in this Article 9 provision. But we really see provisions that are already there as the right move and sort of work already done in the achievement of the EPBD provisions.
Thank you, Remy. And there is definitely some lessons also to learn from those member states or those constituencies who started with the design of MEPS a bit earlier. Okay, thanks for that. And we have also in the chat some shared good example also from Belgium. We're going to look a bit more detail at national example in the second session. Before taking that, maybe Selena, if you can say a little word about shelters. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe allow me for a quick reply to another question or comment that I see that in relation to the guidance documents, I assume you're referring to delegated act and implementing acts. No, these are different documents with also a different legal value. So we are also working on implementing act and delegated acts, actually several ones which are foreseen, and some of them we plan to adopt also by the end of June. But guidance documents are different ones. These are recommendations to member states which are not binding. If they bound someone, they only bind somehow the Commission in the way how we interpret the different articles, although the interpretation can only be done by the court. But these are different documents. Then the question of shelter is actually super interesting because we looked a lot into that. But just to have a dialogue also with stakeholders, because as you know, shelters can be very different things, from a tent to an apartment, but also to many different ones. And in the end, in defining what is a residential or a non-residential buildings, we don't go into the nitty-gritty level of details of really saying this specific building is to be considered residential or not. This is a decision that has to be taken at a national level. Also, I think the principle should be to keep in mind if it makes sense to apply the MEPS or not, if it makes sense to prioritize renovation of these buildings or not. But this is a discussion that has to be taken in each country. So we don't have from the EPBD of relevant EU legislation really a clear definition if shelters have to be considered residential or not, because it's also a bit complex and can mean different things. So I'm not sure this question is super helpful, but that's the way how we have addressed this question so far.
Okay, thank you, Selena, for that. Obviously, I can imagine that further elaboration can be given on this outside of this webinar. Thanks for those questions. We will now move to our second session. So first, we are going to have a deep dive into what is happening in the Netherlands regarding the MEPS scheme in office buildings. And I will give the word now to Joost Hartlief.
Yes, thank you very much, Celine, and thank you very much to Efficient Buildings Europe for giving the Dutch government today the opportunity to share our experiences with the MEPS, the minimum energy performance standards that we already have in place since the 1st of January 2023. My name is Joost Hartlief. I work for the Dutch Enterprise Agency, which is part formerly of the Ministry of Economic Affairs. So I work for the Dutch national government as a national level. Next slide, please. I will give you an overview of my presentation, the outline. I'll be talking a little bit about the introduction of the label safer offices. Way back in 2016 is when we first started thinking about this and communicating about this. I will tell you about the level of compliance that we have achieved over the past 9 years. Then I'll tell you a little bit how enforcement is organized in the Netherlands. And in my last slide, I will share some of our lessons learned. First, let's go to the introduction of the label safer offices obligation. This is all in Dutch. So if any of you want to read it, you're very welcome. The part I'm want to stipulate is that we started communicating. You can see the date on these news articles at the top. We started to communicate about the label an obligation for offices in 2016, and it became formally part of legislation in 2018. So then 5 years in advance, because offices had to be a label C in 1st of January 2023, 5 years in advance we formalized it in the legislation, and 7 years in advance we started communicating about it. Of course, we had some exemptions in the law, for instance, monuments, which was discussed by EB in a previous presentation, and also very small offices, for instance, were exempt. Let's go to the level of compliance that we achieved over the last years. This is my next slide is a graph showing a green bar that's rising rapidly over the last year since 2018, and a red bar. The red bar, of course, represents office buildings with a label D or even worse. The green bar representing office buildings with a label A, B, or C. So those are the offices that do comply. And if we go to the next slide, I can tell you the exact numbers. So by January 2025, 2 years after the law formally took effect, we had 82% of surface area of our offices had an energy label C or better. These are estimates from my organization from the Dutch Enterprise Agency. And if we look to the individual offices, 70% of the offices has energy label C or better. So there's still a number of offices that do not comply. Municipalities are telling us that they think, now go back to the slide, I was not finished yet. Our municipalities are telling us that they think that the level of compliance is a little bit higher than our own estimate. That might be because our data is not extremely, not perfect. So then going to the municipalities and talking about enforcement, how it is organized, because the legislation was put in the Dutch building code, enforcement is automatically organized, and it's with the municipalities. They have to enforce the label C for offices. And in doing so, they have the opportunity to take 4 steps. First step for a municipality would be to write office owners and users, just to create awareness. You can even start with this step of enforcement before the law is really taken into effect. And also at the national government, we have sent tens of thousands of letters to office owners, of which we assumed they would have to comply. A second step, according to Dutch law, the Dutch building code, would be for a municipality start a discussion with the office owner, just issue a warning maybe. And we know that over 6,000 warnings have been sent by municipalities, so that's quite a formal step. Then a third step, according to the Dutch building code, would be a fine. It might even be a repetitive fine. So if you should have a label C for your office and you don't, you might get a fine. We know of, might be more, but we know that at least 24 fines have been issued so far. And the last and most formal step, which we are not aware that has been really taken, but it is a possibility. And that would be the possibility for the municipality to actually close the office. So with that in mind, let's go to the lessons that we learned. What do we see? Well, we see that big offices comply more often, smaller offices comply less often. We think that has to do with the professionalism of owners of big offices. They are often more professionally organized. We see that there was a big autonomous development. Other building types that had no obligation improved as well. We have learned that communication about obligation is very, very important. For example, there was anticipation. We learned by doing research. There was anticipation of some building owners that thought there would be no enforcement at all. So we started communicating about the enforcement that was in place and about giving a little bit extra funds to municipalities for their enforcement, for example. Fourth lesson is that financiers of office buildings played a bigger role than we anticipated because they were unwilling to finance transactions that did not really comply. We also see a very big, bigger that offices that did comply are more worth than offices that do not comply, of course. Fifth lesson is about definitions. Sometimes it can be hard to determine, does an office building have to comply? That has to do with the more complicated buildings, the bigger buildings where you have, for instance, dwellings, shops, offices, and other functions inside the building as well. Sometimes, especially for the owner, but also for the municipality that has to enforce, it was quite difficult to exactly understand whether or not an office had to comply or not. So we also helped them with making two separate, how do you call them, of those PDFs that explained when or when not to comply. And last of our major lessons, we have some smaller ones as well. Last of the major lessons that we learned was that the split incentive was less important than we originally thought. Of course, the office owner had to do most of the investments, and the energy savings would be for the tenant of an office. So we thought there was a big incentive, but in part because the enforcement was organized by that way that as a last step, the municipality would be able to close the office. That was a really incentive for both owner and tenant to work together to make sure that the office did comply to the labels saying. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. And I'll be glad to answer any questions, but I think that will be later on in the program.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thanks really a lot, Joost, also to show the dynamic and the uptake in the Netherlands on this topic. I mean, I just flagged that I think I heard a feedback on the same topic, maybe from you. It was in more than 2 years ago, and the level of compliance was very average, less than 50%. So I think it shows the good dynamics on the topic. We'll come back probably with questions. This is very interesting. Thank you. We're gonna now move to Belgium with Peter Ruyzen, who is a senior economist in the National Bank of Belgium. And Peter, you are going to explain the impact of this Flemish MEPS scheme, so which is energy renovation obligation for home buyer on house prices. This is also a very interesting topic. The floor is yours. We cannot hear you. Can you please unmute? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much for having me in this webinar. So indeed, I will explain to you the impact of the Flemish energy renovation obligation on house prices. So first I will explain the Flemish energy renovation obligation, what it is. So you can go to the next slides, please. So since 2023, home buyers of Flemish houses and apartments with the class E or F energy label, they're obliged to renovate their home to at least the class D label within 5 years from purchasing the house. So this is in fact the first renovation obligation for home buyers in the world, and it has been introduced already, so we can learn from it. So our research project has really investigated the impact on house prices. So before starting with presenting the results, I would first like to show you what is the definition, what is meant by this energy label E or F classes, because it's very different in other countries. And it's also even very different in the other Belgian regions, the Walloon region and the Brussels capital region. So as you can see, in the Flemish region, the energy labels are grouped in buckets of 100 kilowatt hour per square meter. Below 100 is the best label, label A. and above 400 is label E and then label F. And when you buy one of these houses or apartments with E or F, you're obliged to renovate. And this is the Flemish renovation obligation to at least the label D level. So again, just to say, these energy labels in Flanders are very different in the other regions. For instance, the label D energy label corresponds more or less to label E in Wallonia and label F in the Brussels capital region. But when I will speak about energy labels in my presentation, I will always talk about the Flemish classification. So even for the Walloon region, the Brussels capital region, I will use the Flemish label definition. So you can go to the next slide, please. So I have 3 topics I would like to discuss with you. First is the prevalence and characteristics of these sold dwellings with a class E or F energy label. So in our research project, we combined the transactions of all the houses and apartments that have been sold in Belgium. We combined these data with the energy performance certificates databases of the 3 regions, and also with online listings databases. So we have a unique database with all the characteristics of the houses and also, most importantly, the energy label of every house that is sold in Belgium. So on the next slide, on the prevalence of these E and F energy labels, these are shown in orange and red. So this is the distribution of the energy labels in Belgium, in the 3 regions, Flemish Walloon region and Brussels capital region. On the left-hand side, you can see the distribution of the labels for houses. On the right-hand side, they are the apartments. So what is very clear here is that the renovation obligations primarily affect houses rather than apartments. There's very little red color or orange-red color for apartments, and this is because apartments are surrounded by other apartments, by neighboring apartments, and that's why the energy performance of apartments is much lower, more generally. So the renovation obligation, however, affects 1 in 3 sold houses. On the left-hand side, you can see this, that it's about 35% of houses sold that are subject to the renovation obligation. The good news is that this share of E and F dwellings has really shrunk a lot over the past decade. In 2012, it was still 60% of houses sold, and now it's only 35% of houses sold. So you can go to the next slide, please. Now, turning to the characteristics of these class E and F energy labels, one of the conclusions of our article is that it is not only about energy quality. These bad energy labels also have an overall bad quality. So I've shown on this slide 2 indicators. The first one on the left-hand side is the reported building condition reported by the seller of the house in the online advertisement of the house. So you can see that for the E and F energy labels, that there is a lot of orange and red color, meaning a very bad overall quality of the house. So for the F dwellings, for instance, more than half of these sold dwellings are advertised as being to renovate or to rebuild. So they have a very bad overall quality. And on the right-hand side, the year of construction, you can see that these E and F dwellings, they are quite old. So 95% of the F dwellings was built before the 1980s. So they are already old. So they are probably in a bad state, many of those. And as a result of this slide, so remember, they have a very bad quality. Actually, what we find in the next slide, so we find actually that the buyers of these houses with E and F, they are renovating the houses already without a renovation obligation. So many of these houses are renovated even without a renovation obligation. So what we did in our study, so we looked at houses that have been sold twice. So we have 2 energy performance certificates, one for the first sale, which is shown on the horizontal axis, and then for the second sale. And this chart shows the change in the energy label class for these houses. So when focusing on the initial E and F dwellings, so initially on the first sale they had an E or F dwelling, well, what you can see is that the energy label has improved substantially. For the large majority of these houses, they achieve a D label for the second sale, meaning that in the meantime, renovations have taken place. So this is one of the key conclusions. 60% of the second sales in 2022 of these E and F dwellings were already renovated to at least the label D, and it is increases even to 70% in the most recent period. So please go to the next slide. Second topic is the impact of the energy score on house prices. So how much more expensive are the good energy labels? How much cheaper are the bad energy labels? And this is what we have investigated in the second chapter of our research. So this chart on the left shows the price difference of each energy label with a comparable house, but with a Class D energy label. So comparable house meaning the same location, the same building condition, the same age. However, the only change we do is the Class D energy label. So this is a price premium as a result of a better energy label. So the label D is the reference. So 0 means 0% is the horizontal line. And then the green lines are the price premium of the good energy labels. So for the B and A labels, they are sold at 15 to more than 20% price premium compared to this label D, both in Flanders as in the Walloon region. And there is a price discount of 5 to more than 10% for the worst energy labels, the E and F labels. Now, this price difference was already sizable many years. So in 2016, and it was already sizable. But what we observed is that it clearly increased in 2023, 2024 in both of the regions in Belgium, Flanders and the Walloon region. Why is this the case? Well, on the right-hand side, there is the explanation. So both buyers and banks are increasingly taking into account the energy score in the purchase decisions and in mortgage conditions. And this is a result of several factors. So in Europe, we have experienced the energy crisis resulting in higher and more uncertain energy bills. So meaning that energy performance of the building has become more important. Also, there have been many announcements for the future policies, like the future carbon price for heating fuels, also future renovation obligations. And then the two latter elements are the renovation cost has increased, more expensive building materials. And finally, Belgian banks have more and more collected the energy score. So they take the energy score more and more into account in their mortgage conditions, for instance, by providing a lower mortgage rate for the purchase of an energy efficient house. So, okay, so this is the evolution and of the price differences related to the energy score. Now, the key question of our research is what is now the impact of the introduction of the Flemish renovation obligation? So again, this renovation obligation is for the E and F dwellings, requiring them to renovate to at least the Class D label. So this is the final slide. You can, yes, thank you. So the key conclusion is that this introduction of the Flemish renovation obligation has lowered the prices of the houses with a Class E or F energy label, but only by about 2%. So our research shows that these houses, as a result of the Flemish renovation obligation, have become 2% cheaper, both relative to similar ratings in houses with a similar energy rating in the Walloon region, and also compared to a Class D energy label in the Flemish region. So 2% cheaper. Now, why isn't this larger than 2%? Well, there are in fact two reasons which already discussed before. The first reason is that a majority of buyers of these houses were already renovating in any case. So for the majority of buyers, this renovation obligation does not have an impact because they were already planning to renovate. And the second reason is that the price discount for these E and F dwellings was already quite large, and that the renovation cost was largely already included in the price discount. Now, what are the policy implications or the redistributive implications? Well, 2% cheaper houses of E and F rating means that the owners of these houses, that the wealth of these, they decrease their wealth. However, the flip side, and that's the good news of this result, is that there is a small amount of financial leeway to renovate, and that the wealth of these owners of these houses, that the wealth they decrease their wealth. However, the flip side, and that's the good news of this result, is that there is a small amount of financial leeway to renovate, and that the wealth they decrease their wealth. that is created for home buyers to carry out an energy renovation, because the house, as a result of the renovation obligation, is now cheaper, 2% cheaper, and they could use this money to finance the renovation. However, not everybody can pay for this, because with households with a limited repayment capacity, it's possible that this measure could hamper the accessibility of home ownership, because they were not planning to renovate and suddenly they have to finance also the renovation. So this is the conclusion, in fact, of our research. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. You can also find the full research in the link I provided here on the slide. So I just summarized the key conclusions, but there is much more in the report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. This is already triggering a lot of questions you will see in the chat. This is a very rich, detailed and factual analysis, which I believe will be very useful to all EU member states looking at the residential segment. So thanks a lot. Maybe you can already have a look in the chat, because as time flies, we need to pass to our next and final speaker. So we are now with Ander Bilbao, who is a project coordinator and consultant with Cyclica, dedicated to, if I may frame, supporting transformation in the built environment. And here we are going to listen to the presentation of a digital tool to drive building renovation, which I think can very much help translate requirements on the residential stock into very concrete mapping tool and supporting tool on the ground. So the floor is yours, Ander.
Okay, so thank you very much, Celine, and also for the rest of the speakers. So yeah, as Celine said, I'm going to present these digital tools that we have developed in the case of the Basque Country in Spain, in the framework of the OpenGRA project and with the support of the Polytechnical University of Catalonia. So next, please. Okay, the main challenge that we had behind these developments was the need for a change of scale in renovation in the residential sector to achieve the goals set by the EU by 2050. So then we set these 4 initial questions about how can we improve the information on our stock, enable the strategic planning among different levels of administration, also ensure the proactive role of the market agents, and finally communicate and engage with the neighbors. Next, please. Our first objective was to develop the regional database of the residential stock of the Basque Country, and to that end we used this methodology of urban building energy models that enabled the diagnosis of large urban areas from a building-by-building perspective, and this is the interesting part of the methodology. Then we used some GIS and big data techniques, and we were able to develop this database that at the moment contains more than 130,000 buildings that are also geo-referenced. So we have this capacity to locate all the information with an ID in the maps. Then we proceed to the constructive definition of each of the building with the support of the University of the Basque Country in order to proceed to an energy simulation of every single building, both in the current state and, more important, after the renovation measures by 2050. So next, please. And well, this regional database that we define is in fact the ground of the whole project that we have developed. Here we can see the 2 digital platforms that we developed within this project in the Basque Country, the roadmap tool that enables public decision makers to define the renovation roadmaps about the residential stock, connected with the community tool that is focused on neighbors in the sense of engaging them in the renovation of their own buildings. Next, please. So this is the overview, some screenshots about the first digital platform, the roadmap. That, as I said, targets these public decision makers that can be regional or local technicians in order to define their renovation scenarios. So beside the possibility of visualizing all the information from the regional database that we have developed, the main feature is this functionality of developing a specific renovation roadmap about the whole building stock of their competencies according to the criteria that they want to apply. So these criteria we have organized them in some groups regarding the intervention measures, for example, what threshold of energy reduction they want to achieve, in how many steps, also financing variables regarding the grants that are available in each case, etc. We, of course, have the possibility to include new groups of variables like social, environmental, and so on. And in that sense, we can present some results that we will see later, the potential, let's see, of them. But here, what I wanted to highlight is that as the approach relies on this building by building analysis, we also have the possibility of defining a specific draft of renovation passport for each building of our stock. And as we can see here in the bottom side of the screen, we can see each of these lines that refers to a specific building, where we show the order of intervention of the measures, the moment of this intervention, and the reduction in terms of energy consumption, cost, etc. So this tool enables the public decision maker to have a proactive role by giving access for the neighbors, for the tenants, to this draft of renovation passport. Next, please. And well, this is the second platform about the community engagement that is linked to the first tool. This platform at the moment is being implemented in the network of one-stop shops from the Basque government that covers 25 districts in the region. So basically, it provides a digital support for the one-stop shop where the neighbor can go, and with the support of the local technician, refine, let's say, the draft of renovation passport that has been developed with the previous tool. So we can, the neighbor has this possibility to, with an existing draft, refine all the information based on the singularities, let's say, of his own building. And next, please. Okay, so now that we have like this overview of the two digital platforms that we have developed, I wanted to focus on the potentialities according to the different stakeholders, these three groups that we have listed. On the one hand, the public decision makers, where we wanted to provide this capacity to plan strategically and also with a long-term vision, and of course, trying to comply with, at the moment, the EPBD 2024. Then for the market agents, we wanted to provide this stability by defining a long-term framework of intervention. And finally, for neighbors, this trust that is required, and finally also the possibility to engage within the renovation processes. So for our first stakeholder, the public decision maker, as I said, here, this one of the functionalities, let's say, of the tool is the possibility to detect these worst performing buildings. As I said, we are talking about residential buildings, according to Article 9. So in the bottom side of the screen, we can see the distribution of all the buildings from the regional stock of the Basque Country according to their energy efficiency. So basically, we have the possibility to define this threshold that limits these 43% less efficient buildings that is defined in the EPBD. In our case, is 178,000 dwellings. Then we also have to comply with our national regulation, in this case, the LTRS 2020. And we have this second group of buildings in yellow that also have to be renovated, even though they are more efficient than the first group. And then the nice thing about the tool is that as we rely on this building by building approach, we can locate specifically each of these buildings within our maps. So then the user, this regional or local technician, has the possibility to prioritize the intervention according to these worse performing and then also more efficient buildings that have to be renovated according to the EPBD. Then the second functionality that I wanted to highlight here is of course, the potential of developing the regional renovation plan according to this Article 3. As I said, the main user of this tool is this public decision maker, but we can be talking about a regional technician that, of course, his scope of intervention is the region, so he drafts his own plan for that scope. But then different local technicians can also access the platform, so we can merge these different plans, the regional plan, with these singular local plans into one integrated plan that looks for this transscalarity, let's say, in planning, because of course the needs of a specific municipality won't be the same as the ones from the whole region. This plan has also to look for this regional, it's the national trajectory, in fact, from the EPBD. In this case, we have translated it to the regional context. Here you can see the graph about this threshold that we are complying from 2025 to 2050, and the big numbers, the total dwellings, and the energy reduction that would be achieved by 2050. Okay, then the second group of stakeholders, here the market agents, the private sector, we were concerned about providing this stability, and we thought, how? So we thought it was interesting to develop this long-term demand of intervention. And here in the bottom side of the screen, we can see the distribution year by year of this specific intervention. So each color corresponds to one element of the envelope, in the sense that how many windows are we going to replace every year, how many square meters of facade or roof or patios, etc., are we going to insulate. These, of course, are the results of a specific scenario developed by the public decision maker. But here what we wanted to highlight is the possibility that these results are shared with these market agents, these construction company, material suppliers, and so on, in order to commonly design this industrial policy, in this case, regional industrial policy, around the renovation sector. So it's somehow the possibility to put together this public and private organization. And also we have the possibility in this visualization, this would be more related to promoters of renovation projects to aggregate projects. So we would not be talking about only the building scale, but we can enlarge this scale of intervention in the sense of doing projects in the level of a street or a district, etc. Okay, and finally, our last stakeholder that was touched by our digital platforms are the neighbors. In this case, our focus was, on the one hand, to provide trust in the sense that reliability on the information that we can offer. Also, we put some quite a lot of resources in how we can show this, let's say, complex information in a more understandable way. And also, as I said, as we provide this draft of renovation passport, this not substitute the figure of the renovation passport, it's just a draft, but it gives the neighbor the possibility to have a baseline on which to construct, let's say, his own plan by refining, by saying, okay, I would not change the windows that way with that characteristic or that year, etc. So we have this, the focus, let's say, is this engagement within this first renovation, this first process of the renovation. Okay, and just to conclude, well, it was a fast presentation, but basically what we have achieved here within the Basque Country with the application of our tools we can say that it's possible to improve the information on the building stock with this database that we have developed. Also enable this strategic planning between the different levels, in our case, the regional and the local levels, put them together with these integrated plans. Also activate the market agents. This is giving them the possibility to participate in this planning, in these long-term plannings. And finally, also the possibility to communicate and engage with the neighbors of these buildings. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ander. This is very interesting to see how deep and how granular you managed to bring this dimension of planning, prioritization of renovation, and bringing that to the engagement of actors that are going to make it real. So thanks a lot for that. So we're left with a bit less than 10 minutes to go through a question. I would like to invite other speakers to put their camera on. Unmute, if possible. Thank you. And while we're doing this, just to give you a little bit overview, because in parallel to the live discussion, we have a chat which has been quite lively. So thanks for areas already answered by the speakers. We had some questions around EPCs and monitoring already answered. We got some nice example regarding what's happening in Germany and cost-effective translation of renovation trajectories and MEPS. Thanks for that. We also had some comments regarding what happened prior to the EPBD in Italy, to which I would refer to the fact that construction rules are in fact local rules, and that also de facto the better planning and long-term overview of what's needed is also helping with creating the best condition for the renovation and the right skill to be developed in the market. So regarding our second session speaker, I would first take one question regarding the office building in the Netherlands, is how you would rate the level of success right now that you have a bit of lessons and overview over the dynamics, knowing that it's not 100% yet. So how do you see that?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Celine, because of course we put the label C obligation in a law, and with the law you would expect 100% compliance because the law is the law. So one could argue, if one wished, that our label C obligation is not a success. I would argue otherwise. That's my personal opinion, because I showed the green bars. It was really rising since 2018, rising steeply, and has been rising, continued to rise since 2023. And one thing that I did not really show you is that what we also see is that the Dutch offices that renovate in order to oblige to the label C obligation, they do not renovate, well, sometimes they do, but mostly they do not renovate exactly to label C, but often they also go quite a little bit higher, so they have a very good renovation. So personally, even though we did not achieve 100% compliance on the day the law went into effect, I would consider this a success.
Thanks, Joost. And that also brings us to something we discussed earlier, which is the long-term view. So it is one step in the transformation of that segment, to which market actors also sometimes react, having the longer term in mind, which is also interesting. Maybe now moving to Belgium, to Flanders, because we have a few questions. I guess you have seen them. Peter, maybe you could comment a little bit regarding elements on the absolute number of transactions and the impact of the scheme on where you got the building conditions reported. Is it from EPC or others? There were also some other points raised in the chat regarding the enforcement and difference in interest rates. I'm not sure we have time for all, but maybe you want to give a few comments. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the interesting questions. So first of all, one of the impacts on the number of transactions is that some of the transactions were brought forward. So we saw that there was an increase in transactions of these Class E and F dwellings just before the introduction of the renovation obligations, so as to escape the renovation obligations. So these transactions were brought forward. But this is only a temporary effect because after in the next quarter, in the beginning of 2023, there was a drop in these transactions, but then they have more stabilized. So this bringing forward is one of the side effects of the renovation obligations, that some people want to escape the obligation. Second question on the building condition. Well, as I explained, we have combined many databases. It's not in the EPC database. No, it is included in the online listings database. So of all the online listings, we combined it with the sales database and with the energy performance certificates database. So that's how we could have such a rich database with reported building condition, for instance. Enforcement measures, well, there are fines that are associated with non-compliance. So that is the way that it will be enforced. Also, there was a question about will the bar be raised? So I spoke about the renovation obligation to a Class D label. Well, previously it was announced that it would be raised to a label C in 2028, and then even more strict in the coming decades. However, the recent Flemish government has reversed this regulation, and so now there is no plans of making it more strict for the buyers of the houses. At the same time, there is also some MEPS for all existing buildings which have been announced. And they are still in place, so they will still be happening. And finally, on the mortgage rate, well, actually, it was in several newspapers that some banks, it really depends from bank to bank, but provide a discount of 20 basis points, up to 20 basis points for the purchase of an energy efficient house. 20 basis points, what does it mean? So it means that you can buy 2% more for the same monthly repayment. So that's a sizable impact. And also banks take into account the future renovation cost when granting or when doing the credit affordability analysis. So this is also affect how banks take into account this regulation in their credit policies. Finally, there was also a question on, is it good? Yes, I think it's good that the price discount corresponds now better to the renovation costs. I also want to highlight one of the side effects of the increased importance of the energy label. So we find that there is more bunching, meaning that the occurrence of energy scores just below the threshold has increased, and there is a drop just above the threshold. And we think this is partly related to misreporting. So as one of the previous speakers told, it's very important that the quality of these EPC certificates is high to keep the confidence in these schemes. So thank you very much. If there are more questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure you will get more questions, but we need to close. We need to come to an end. Thanks a lot for that. So just a few words. Thanks for those national examples. Thanks also to our first speaker in the first session. I think it's interesting to see how the pragmatic approach on the ground, the fact that those renovation dynamics, trajectories and requirements are having a real impact in the market, thanks for the example in Belgium and in the Netherlands, but also that it's a very evolving and moving topic. So it's not fixed in stone, and this is very rich. It's also very good to see the link between the planning, the prioritization, and how market actors can engage with new tools on helping to digitalize the challenge that needs to be addressed, and how this is helping real market players' engagement with industry players like those present in Efficient Buildings Europe. So all of this is linked. I'd like also to underline what I see, which is very powerful, is that those tools, those approaches to make it more granular, more prioritized, also help to build trust in this market of renovation, which I believe is going to be the main driver for accelerating renovation rates in the future as in support of EPBD implementation. Some question may have been left unanswered. You have all of our contacts, and probably speakers can also be contacted afterwards if you have specific questions, or you reach out to the Secretariat of Efficient Buildings Europe, which I'd like to thank for the support for this webinar. Remy, Aphrodite, Alessia, and the whole team, thanks a lot. And also warn you that we're going to have, this is not the end, we're going to have other webinars. And the next one will be on energy performance certificates. So thanks a lot for the participation, for the engagement in the chat, and please stay tuned.